So let's turn 2 Kings chapter 20. Let's begin now in reading in verse 1. Well, just for a second, let's sort of review. Remember we talked about last time about the benefits, some of the benefits of being in the winter stage of life. And remember we said that one of the benefits is grandchildren. You know, they bring a perspective that maybe we didn't have when we were younger, and that grandkids offer sort of an opportunity maybe to redo some things we did as parents, some of the mistakes we made. You know, most grandparents, they don't get as wound up about things as maybe parents do. And so part of that winter stage of life gives maybe a perspective that's a little different than when we were parents. We have a chance to sort of have time with grandchildren. Remember we said that in that stage of life, often we have more wisdom and more time and even more money sometimes. We're able to help in ways that maybe we couldn't when we were just, a parent. Also, we talked about the benefits of the winter stage of life was that we can mentor others. You remember we said that we made this a study of Elijah and Elisha, and how Elijah, put the cloak over Elisha, indicating that he was sort of his understudy. And we talked about Eli and Samuel. Remember, Eli made a lot of mistakes with his sons and made a lot of mistakes in his life, and yet God still kept him and used him in a very effective way, with Samuel. So in spite of his failings, he was able to still be useful in that latter part of his life. Remember we said that part of going into the winter stage of life is that we sometimes become dependent on other people, and that's not very natural for us. We tend not to want to do that, and yet Paul made some comments that were very poignant for that, and he said God's power is made perfect in weakness. That is, that we become more dependent on God, and because of that, we actually are strong, even though we may appear to the world to be weak. Paul rejoiced in his weaknesses in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. So that's kind of a review. We'll read now 2 Kings chapter 20, and starting in verse 1. This is Hezekiah we're going to look at today. In those days, Hezekiah became ill and was at the point of death. The prophet Isaiah, son of Amoz, went to him and said, "This is what the Lord says, put your house in order, because you are going to die. You will not recover." Hezekiah turned his face to the wall and prayed to the Lord, "Remember, O Lord, how I have walked before you faithfully and with wholehearted devotion, and have done what is good in your eyes." And Hezekiah wept bitterly. So he's been given the news that he's about to die. And he was not in the winter stage of life, even though we kind of studying that stage. He was probably about 39 years old. The Bible says in 2 Corinthians 18 that he reigned 29 years, and he started at age 25. So that would be 54. And if you back off the 15 years that God gave him, he was probably in his late 30s, 39, when he was told that he was going to die. And so he was not in the winter, and yet he's facing the end of his life, isn't he? And so it's, I think, valuable to study what he did. He turns and he prays to God. This is interesting to me. Why give a prophet to tell him you're going to die? I mean, what's the point of that? Why not just take him? I mean, if it's his time, and it's time for God to take him, why not just take him? What was the value in telling him, you're going to die? You have any thoughts about that? Okay. So he had time now, or at least God was going to give him time enough to get some things straight, right? So there's value in that. A person maybe learns that they've got an illness, and they're going to die. There's value in that. You think about, as you said, I think preparing a will. We have assets we want to pass on to our loved ones, My dad, when he was nearing the end of his life, we sold a house that he had as a rental house. And, that is really not the wise thing to do from a tax standpoint, because you do not get a stepped-up basis. You keep that same basis. We'd had that house for probably 35 years. So we had a lot of depreciation to recapture. That wasn't the wise thing to do, but we needed the cash, so we did it. Well, we had a good accountant, and he figured out a way to make it work so that we didn't have to recapture. Well, that was good, but it would have been better, if we'd had some planning, maybe. You think about people that set up trusts, and they avoid probate. All of that stuff is expensive, and it will deplete a person's, estate. So there's value in having sort of, a heads up, so to speak, of you're about to die. Putting your house in order. What are some other things that we can do? Not practical things, not so much about money or our estate, but maybe spiritual things. What are some things that a benefit maybe of knowing in advance, that you're going to pass? Have some thought. Okay, it's a good thought. Yeah, if we think we have lots of time, we tend to stray, don't we? I mean, do you remember the rich man? He tore down his barns, built bigger barns, and he said, I've got enough for many years to come. And the thought was, I've got a lot of time. Well, he didn't. The Bible says, tonight your life will be demanded of you. So he didn't have time. But if we know we have time is short, we know to remain faithful, right? We don't go out and sin knowing that we're going to die tonight, We take it a lot more seriously, don't we? Take our faith a lot more seriously, I think. Okay, good. Anything else? What is some benefit of knowing and maybe in advance? Very good. Yes. I mean, could we not all make a list of people that are on our list, our bad list? And, if you know you're going to pass away soon, maybe you call those people and make some amends. Yeah, it's very good. We sort of withhold forgiveness, don't we, from people? And if we know time is short, and we know the Lord's principle that, I'm not going to forgive you if you don't forgive other people, man, that makes it a lot more serious, doesn't it? So, Hezekiah is told to put his house in order, and then he turns and weeps and prays. One of the things we've done, and it's not the best, but we have a book, and in the book has like a little pouch for keys, car keys, house keys, maybe the keys to the back shed or whatever, and then maybe a list of where things are, bank accounts, insurance policies, just a book put together. And it's woefully out of date right now. It needs to be updated. But, I had a relative die just a few months ago, and he didn't have any of that. And it's been a lot of work to try to get, go through his stuff and figure out where the things that he had. So we can have practical things. We can also forgive people, maybe. So Hezekiah has this opportunity, and then he cries and prays to God. Let's keep reading. 2 Kings 20, starting in verse 4 now. Before Isaiah had left the middle court, the word of the Lord came to him, "Go back and tell Hezekiah, the leader of my people, this is what the Lord, the God of your father David, has said. I have heard your prayer and seen your tears. I will heal you. On the third day from now, you will go up to the temple of the Lord. I will add 15 years to your life, and I will deliver you and this city from the hand of the king of Assyria. I will defend this city for my sake and for the sake of my servant David." Then Isaiah said, "Prepare a poultice of figs." And they did so and applied it to the boil, and he recovered. So notice, he prays to the Lord answers that prayer. We think sometimes, especially when it was written in such a definitive way, you will die tonight. But the Lord's heart can be changed, can it? And he was touched by Hezekiah's prayer, and so he repented. He allowed Hezekiah to live another 15 years. And I want you to notice something here. He says that that he has something to do with his own healing. Did you notice that? He tells him, make this poultice, put it on your eyes, or put it on your boil, and it'll get better. So that to me is very interesting. Why would God do it that way? Did God have to do it that way? No. Okay. Do you believe that you can heal? Here, do this. And then what if what if Hezekiah had said, no, Lord, I know that you've got the power to heal me, and I'm going to just trust in you, because, to do anything would mean that I'm trusting in my works, so I can't do that. I'm just going to trust you, and I'm going to pray. Would he have been healed? No. In fact, that would be disobedience, wouldn't it? What that person would be defining as better faith, a faith that doesn't rely on its works and so forth, actually is disobedience, because he told him, make this poultice, put it on the sore, and you're going to get better. And I think sometimes that we think that way, or we hear that from religious people that say, that I'm not trusting in my works, I'm trusting in the Lord. Well, you're not doing what the Bible says either, right? What does this obviously kind of relate to that I'm talking about? Baptism. Yeah. I'm just going to trust in the Lord. Well, yeah, we trust in the Lord. And then because of that, we obey him, don't we? So I think that's interesting that you remember when Jesus healed the man born blind, John chapter 9? Remember he put some saliva and made mud and put it on his eyes, and then he was told to go wash in the pool of Siloam. Why do that? There was a test there to see how faithful he was. And I think that's sort of God's plan throughout the Bible. There are times when God heals somebody immediately, but in many cases, there is an involvement of that person that's being healed. Okay, anybody have any thoughts or questions they want to bring up about this story? Okay, let's keep reading, starting in verse 8, chapter 20, verse 8. Hezekiah had asked Isaiah, what will be the sign that the Lord will heal me, and that I will go up to the temple of the Lord on the third day from now? Notice third day. Is that kind of interesting? What else happened after 3 days, right? Yeah, the resurrection, yeah. Okay, verse 9. Isaiah answered, this is the Lord's sign to you that the Lord will do what he has promised. Shall the shadow go forward 10 steps, or shall it go back 10 steps? Verse 10. It is a simple matter for the shadow to go forward 10 steps, said Hezekiah. Rather, have it go back 10 steps. Then the prophet Isaiah called upon the Lord, and the Lord made the shadow go back the 10 steps it had gone down the stairway of Ahaz. Anybody have anything like the sundial of Ahaz? You have sundial? Okay. So that's interesting to me. It's kind of strange. What is that? Anybody have studied that at all, or made any kind of know what that is? What little study I did showed that there was a stairway leading to the temple, and that Ahaz, king, which was Hezekiah's daddy, probably made this stairway, and it became known as Ahaz stairway. And it was probably a pretty long stairway, and it was, the sun could shine as the sun was rising and setting. If it was midday, the shadow would be almost gone. If it was early morning, it would be, maybe most of the top part of the stairs would be shaded. And if it was late day, then maybe the shade would be on the bottom part of the steps. And that they maybe had come to use that sort of as a sundial. Maybe sort of like, where's the shadow? Oh, it's on the bottom. It must be 4 o'clock. That kind of, they sort of use that as a way of measuring time. And so he is doing a miraculous thing here to show that I can heal you, and here's how you're going to know it. And he moves the shadow. I don't know what that means. Did he hold did he hold time did he make time go backwards? Do you remember there's another story where what did God do? Do you remember in a battle? What was it? Yeah, held the sun. So kind of the same thing, I think. It's this is mentioned twice, once in 2 Kings chapter 20 and also in Isaiah 38. And both times it is a reference to this story. So I don't really know if it's something that, God didn't want to share what it was exactly, but at least we know that he made it change. And that was the sign. Okay, let's keep reading in chapter 2 Kings 20, starting at verse 12. At that time, Balaam, son of Baaldan, king of Babylon, sent Hezekiah letters and a gift because he had heard of Hezekiah's illness. Hezekiah received the messengers and showed them all that was in his storehouses, the silver, the gold, the spices, the fine oil, his armory, and everything found among his treasures. There was nothing in his palace or in his kingdom that Hezekiah did not show them. Then Isaiah the prophet went to King Hezekiah and asked him, "What did those men say, and where did they come from?" "From a distant land," Hezekiah replied. "They came from Babylon." The prophet asked, "What did they see in your palace?" "They saw everything in my palace," Hezekiah said. "There is nothing among the treasures that I did not show them." Now, why did he do that? That seems like a really dumb thing to do, doesn't it? You've got people that are enemies of God, and they come to visit you because supposedly they want to, congratulate you for being healed. Does an enemy really want to congratulate you about anything? I mean, no, these people have bad intent. And he just, in a really dumb thing, he shows them everything, all the armory, all the riches that he had. Then verse 16, then Isaiah said to Hezekiah, "Hear the word of the Lord. The time will surely come when everything in your palace and all that your fathers have stored up in this day will be carried off to Babylon. Nothing will be left, says the Lord, and some of your descendants of your own flesh and blood that will be born to you will be taken away, and they will become eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon." Now, what would we do? I mean, what would you do if someone said, your grandkids are going to be hauled off into captivity, and they're going to become eunuchs for a king because of what you did, because of your pride? Most of us would cry. I mean, most of us would think, man, I really blew it. I showed something that I shouldn't have showed, and, God was gracious. He gave me 15 more years, and look what I did with it. And we would be sorry that we did that. But notice what he says in verse 19. "The word of the Lord you have spoken is good," Hezekiah replied. For he thought, "Will there not be peace and security in my lifetime?" So, thank goodness it's not going to happen during my lifetime. Isn't that? That's kind of what he thinks, it seems like. I'm glad it's not going to happen to me. That to me, Hezekiah, for the most part, was a very good king, wasn't he? I mean, he instituted strict obedience to God, to Yahweh, and he got rid of a lot of, the Baal worship and so forth. But out here, he wasn't very smart, and he really did some bad things. And I think it showed a little bit of selfishness, doesn't it? At least I'm going to be okay. Okay, so I want to contact. This is someone who, even though he was not in the winter stage of his life, we can sort of see that. He's near death. He does some things. God heals him. Now I want to look at another person who was in the winter stage and who really was in winter, and we're going to see how he reacted. Let's look at 2 Corinthians chapter 4. I want to kind of draw a contrast between Hezekiah and the Apostle Paul. So let's turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 4. Second Corinthians chapter 4, let's start in verse 16. Therefore, we do not lose. He's describing his condition, okay? And he says, and by the way, where is he in 2 Corinthians chapter 4? Where is Paul, do you think, when he's writing this? Prison, okay? So not the greatest conditions, right? You compare Hezekiah being a king versus Paul being in jail. Not exactly the same. But look at 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 16. Therefore, we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles. And when I read that in Paul's perspective of that, Paul did not have light troubles, by my definition. Right? He was flogged many times, put in jail, shipwrecked. Even his own countrymen, tried to kill him. And so, but he looks at it like it's momentary, and for our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. I want us to notice first, he celebrates that inner man. Outwardly, we're wasting away. And really, we are we not? We're aging. We don't, that beauty, that rich beauty at our young age, it does not last very long, does it? And we begin to decline. And that is very large part of the winter stage of life, isn't it? We are very much aware of our failings physically. But he doesn't even think about that. He says, outwardly I'm wasting away, but inwardly I'm being renewed. How many of us could say that? Some of the older people that I've known in life have really been examples of that. They've grown in their faith. And when I talk to them, I'm talking to somebody who's very much an encouragement, because inside they're growing. So he doesn't really talk about the outer man. He could say, I'm dying here in prison, Lord. But we don't hear him say that. He doesn't talk about his afflictions in that way. And then notice, he compares his earthly troubles with the glory that's going to be revealed. And he says, eternal glory that outweighs them all. So this idea of what I'm suffering now, what I'm going to receive in heaven is going to be way better than what I'm getting now. That perspective is so good. Eternal glory versus light and momentary troubles, We don't think that way. At least I don't. Maybe you guys do. But when I'm stressed out or worried about something, or something's happened to me, it seems like forever, right? And it's not going to ever end. And look at how difficult it is for me, right? And Paul's not that way at all. Notice he also sees things that are unseen by our earthly eyes. He says, the unseen is eternal, but that which is seen doesn't last, right? It is temporary. Do you remember when Elisha prayed? Remember, he had his attendant, right? And Elisha doesn't seem to be worried about the fact that they are going to be invaded and they're going to have a battle. And then, you remember what he said? He prayed for his attendant to be able to see what he saw. And so the attendant, God opens his eyes, and what does he see? Remember? Angels, yes. A host of them, right? He is not rattled because he sees something that no one else sees. And I think Paul, by faith at least, sees the same thing. His life's going to end, and he knows it. And it may not be pretty because he's going to be in Rome. And that's not a place as a Christian you would want to be. And yet, he has this perspective that's so different than Hezekiah. Truthfully, very different than Hezekiah. Yes, sir. No. Yes. Absolutely. Very well said, yes. He has invested a lot in the future generations. Paul also has a little discourse similar to this in 2 Timothy. Let's look at 2 Timothy chapter 4. That's very good. I have not seen how his investment was in the younger generation. Yeah. 2 Timothy chapter 4. Okay, let's look at verse 6. 2 Timothy 4, verse 6. For I am already being poured out like a drink offering, and the time has come for my departure. So let's stop there just for a second. This idea of the drink offering, it has a reference to the Old Testament, doesn't it? Do you remember in Exodus chapter 29 and also in Numbers 15, they talk about the drink offering. And, they will talk about an offering, but then part of that offering would be, they would take an animal and kill it and so forth, but part of it would be to pour wine or oil or something on it, and before it was offered and set on fire. In Numbers 15, it talks about in verse 10 that you pour that wine over as a drink offering. And do you remember Jesus even talked about the drink offering when he said in Luke 22, he said, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you." That whole idea of the drink offering. A lot of the sacrifices in the Levitical sacrifices are predictions of Jesus, aren't they? They are predictions of the Lord. So when you have the scapegoat, where they put their hands on the goat and send it into the wilderness, that was a prediction of Jesus, wasn't it? And likewise, I think the drink offering was a prediction of a person's life that had been poured out for God, had been sacrificed totally for God. Well, Paul makes that same reference to his life as a drink offering. And he does it more than once. He does it in 2 Timothy 4 here, and then also in Philippians chapter 2. Both times he's referring to his life as this, that I've been poured out for God. Sort of this total sacrifice for the Lord. And then he makes this comment, my departure's near. He saw his life and his death as a departure. I'm leaving this life. It's not the end. And we don't sometimes think that way, do we? We think about all the things that are coming to an end in our life. And yet Paul had this idea of I'm leaving for another place. Do you remember when Jesus was with his disciples? They go and get this donkey or whatever and he tells them, if anybody asks you why you're doing this, you say to them, my master's departure is at hand, I believe, and he wants this animal. The Lord had that same concept. My time is at hand. And so Paul makes reference to his life as a drink offering. Let's look at verse 8 also. Well, verse 7. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race, and I've kept the faith. And that is one of the most beautiful passages. He saw his life as a fight, as in a race, and as his faith. I've fought the good fight. I've finished the race, and I've kept the faith. Those three things, you think about it, are really a basis of how we can have hope, isn't it? Without those things, we are in a race and we're to finish. We have faith that we have to keep. We have a fight against an enemy that we're involved in. And if we don't see that life that way, if life is just a matter of, having this pleasurable experience here, then when we do grow old and when life does come to a close, we are very, very discouraged because we have nothing else. I remember my stepmom, she was, she was telling me that she felt like I was spending too much time at church, and I said, I think you should come to our church. And she said, I'm not a religious person. And she said, I don't think she said, I think the Bible is a book of fairy tales. I thought, how can you think that way when you've never read it? You don't know. But she said, but I'm not afraid of dying. And I thought, that's a pretty bold statement when you have no faith, right? When her life came to an end, she was deathly afraid. Even we become fearful at the end of our life. And it doesn't mean we don't love the Lord. The Lord himself was overwhelmed to the point of death. He says, I'm sorrowful to the point of death in the garden. And yet, we have hope that the world doesn't have. And I think Paul's approach is so beautiful. I've kept the faith, I've fought the good fight, finished the race. Man, I hope that we can say that when we're at the end of our life, don't you? I want to be able to say that I'm finished the race, that this world is not forever, and I'm ready to leave when it's time. Does anybody have anything they'd like to say about that? Yes, sir. Yeah. True. Very true. That's very good. Yeah, I think I've mentioned this before, but I've known of people that were, as they approached the very end of their life, they called their family in and they told them what they needed to hear, that they had maybe not told them all along because they didn't want to hurt the relationship, right? Well, the relationship's about to end because I'm going to die, so I'm going to tell you what you need to hear. And I'm sorry if it hurt your feelings. And the story that I heard was he let them have it, and they needed to hear it because they'd veered off. And that it was a good thing. Yeah. Anybody else? This idea of keeping the faith, fighting the fight. The world doesn't see it that way. It sees it as accumulating more wealth. How much wealth does it take to not die? You cannot have enough, can you? You're going to die, and you're going to leave it all. Okay, let's look at verse 8. He also has a really beautiful thing here. He says, now there is in store for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, and not only to me, but also on those who have longed for his appearing. That's us, isn't it? Everybody. This idea of thinking about the crown of righteousness. I don't know what that's going to be like. What is that? Is that a crown, a literal crown? I mean, I don't get that from the passage, but there's something there. That reward of heaven to him is what he's thinking about. If we're thinking about our earthly life and what we're leaving behind, we're going to be very discouraged, aren't we? And yet, if we're thinking about the crown that we're going to get, we can see that as a good thing. I'm departing. And if you think if everything is perfect now, and we think there's almost no end to this life. I'm very young and things are great. It's hard to have faith. But when you're near the end and you're in that winter stage, and maybe life isn't what it used to be, and you're in pain and so forth, you have a different perspective, and one of faith, one that looks forward maybe to a change. We can't go back and fix this life, so I'm looking forward to a better life. And it happens to everybody. Everybody gets to that point, if God gives them that time, that this life fades in its significance. People that were very famous, don't often deal with that very well because this was their life. There's a song that I remember hearing, and it said, I want the best of both worlds. It's a heavy metal song, and it was bad, The whole idea is, and even he says in the song, I don't want to die and be born again. I want to stick around and see what this life has to offer. wow, that's worldly thinking. And that's great if you stay in your 20s forever, but you don't, right? You get old and you get near death, and this world has no hope from that perspective. Anybody have anything else that you'd like to say about this? This to me is interesting. Yes, sir. Yes. Yes. Very well said. Yes. Yeah, we have a future, don't we? And it doesn't seem like it when you're on your deathbed. But if you have faith, you know that we do. I knew a guy years ago, he was a friend, he was very wealthy. His father owned a company that was probably maybe a $30 million company. And he was very frugal with his money. And he was bragging to me one time he had bought his Suburban on eBay or something, and he saved $5,000. And I thought, that guy didn't have to worry about money, and yet he was very, very, very consistent, very frugal with what he had. But he wasn't worried because he had an inheritance. And man alive, we do too, don't we? Much better than any earthly inheritance. And that gives me hope and faith, I'll tell you. Well, if there's nothing else, I'm going to stop 5 minutes early. That's not unscriptural, is it? I can leave 5 minutes early. That's something no preacher does, so I might as well do it now. Here. Thank you all.